Welcome to the Hammer Territory Podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you are having a great start to your Wednesday, a great night on Tuesday, great start to your Wednesday, and you should be if you are in Braves country, because let's be honest, we go back, not this past Sunday wasn't that much fun, but you go to the previous Sunday, the Braves 1-5 on that West Coast road trip, versus the Mariners, versus the Dodgers. We were talking about, the fact that the Braves offense has just sputtered, just had not been successful, but since then, a little bit of home cooking, the Braves now 15-4 at home, best team in baseball at home. They now have, thankfully, since that West Coast road trip, they are 6-1. And as Stephen Tolbert, my podcast partner, and I have discussed before, it's always good to be able to talk about Braves baseball when they're in the midst of a good stretch of winning instead of losing. Stephen, how are you tonight, sir?
Shawn, what's going on, buddy? It's good to talk to you again. Yeah, it's been a roller coaster, honestly. That West Coast trip was so bad, and I mean, the getting swept by the Dodgers in kind of convincing fashion was kind of the cherry on top to that whole trip. And then, credit to them, man. They came home. It was a pretty soft week in terms of schedule. They had 2 off days in the week. They only played 5 games. They had 2 against the Red Sox. They came in, won that series pretty easily. The pitching, we're going to talk about it here in a minute, but the pitching really dominated that series. And then went up to New York, very easily could have had a sweep, pitched well enough to have a sweep, at least, from the starter standpoint, just let one get away on Sunday. But yeah, it took 2 out of 3 there, and then came back home and I've obviously gone 2-0 versus Chicago in these first 2 games. So yeah, 6-1 since that pretty disastrous West Coast trip. It's a really good bounce back, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in detail as we go. But yeah, it's always good to do these with you, buddy.
Absolutely. And we're going to start it off, with, for those who have listened to the podcast, again, you could find Hammer Territory, part of the Foul Territory Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcasts, also across all forms of social media at Hammer Territory, on Twitter, at Hammer Territory, on Instagram, Facebook, myself at StatsSAC on Twitter, Stephen at @B_outliers. But Stephen, I have a fun stat to tell you, and it's so much fun, I can barely contain my excitement. Stephen, there have only been 3 instances this year in which a team held their opponent to 0 runs scored in back-to-back games. Do you want to guess what those 2 games were? Are those 2? You want to guess the 2 teams that have done those 3 occurrences now so far?
Well, obviously the Braves were one because they just did it the last 2 games.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know who's the other one.
It's the Guardians who also did it, and then the Braves. The Braves actually did it on April 22nd and April 23rd. They are the only team so far this year that has held their opponents to 0 runs in back-to-back games. And the reason I bring that up, Stephen, is because we've talked about what has dominated a lot of conversation about the Braves here, in recent days, is the fact that the offense has not lived up, to its reputation. It thankfully is starting a bit too. 7 runs is the first time we've scored that many, I believe, in over 3 weeks. But we talked about the pitching has been good. But I don't think we've talked about just the fact that the Braves pitching has really started to emerge as being one of the best staffs in baseball. And it's no surprise that the 2 starting pitchers who were on the mound in these back-to-back shutouts were Reynaldo Lopez on Monday and Chris Sale on Tuesday. Stephen, Chris Sale, another excellent night overall when it came to his production, limiting the Cubs all night long. And the great thing about Sale is that he just looks so comfortable on the mound. 7 innings pitch, he's consistently hitting that 7 innings mark. So efficient, 9 strikeouts, only 2 hits allowed, no walks, 2.54 ERA. I know MLB.com just released their Cy Young favorites for each league so far. It was a travesty that neither Lopez or Sale are on that list, but you've got 2 pitchers who are pitching like all-stars, the 2 pitchers that Alex Anthopoulos added this offseason. It's been great to see their consistency.
Yeah, I mean, if I had told you, in spring training that the Braves were going to have 2 aces in the rotation, I think everybody would have just assumed that was Max Fried and Spencer Strider. Everybody would have probably been like, yeah, that of course the Braves are going to have 2 aces. They've had 2 aces for the last couple of years. But if I told you in spring training the Braves were going to have 2 aces and neither one of them were Max Fried or Spencer Strider, that would have come as a shock, I think. And that's how good Reynaldo and Chris Sale have pitched. I mean, they've just been unbelievable, a level that I think even the most optimistic outlooks probably would not have been able to predict. I think with Sale, I'm going to say this. I'm going to try to say this the correct way so people don't get mad at me. I think with Sale, the numbers are more real than maybe with Reynaldo. I think Reynaldo is probably pitching a level above his talent level. I think when we get to the end of the year, Reynaldo is probably going to settle into more of a, he's got like a 1.3 ERA right now. I don't know that that's Ronaldo's true talent level. I think he's probably closer to a 3 ERA guy, but that's still fantastic, of course. But with Sale, I mean, we've seen Chris Sale do this. When he's been healthy, like he's has plenty track record as being the best pitcher in baseball when he's right. So as far as he goes, I mean, he could absolutely win the Cy Young. Like, there's no question he could finish the year with an ERA in the twos if he stays healthy. For the whole season, he's just that good. So, and then Max has really picked it up as we've gone, and Charlie Morton's pitched really well. Brad and I talked about that on Friday night after his last start. So, yeah, this rotation has been nails, and geez, just couldn't come at a better time with the offense. I mean, the starting rotation and the offense have kind of zigzagged a little bit, and as one went, the others come, and as one come, the other went, and it's actually timed out pretty well, where the Braves haven't at any point gone, the offense is down and the pitching is down. They've at least had one of them going to keep them in games, and that's why they still have one of the best records in baseball despite being inconsistent. So yeah, it's been fantastic. And Sale and Lopez and Alex Anthopoulos, of course, for acquiring the two of those guys, deserve a lot of credit.
Absolutely. And, you were talking about the numbers for Chris Sale and Reynaldo Lopez. Entering tonight, Chris Sale now has a 2.54 ERA. Reynaldo Lopez after last night a 1.34. And entering tonight, Chris Sale had a lower expected ERA, a lower FIP, and a lower xFIP. When it comes to expected ERA, Chris Sale entering tonight was at a 2.84. Reynaldo Lopez at 3.71, and it makes sense. Right now, Reynaldo Lopez has a 90% rate when it comes to, leaving left on 90% left on base percentage. That likely will go down a bit. And so you may start to see his, a bit of regression. But overall, he's been outstanding. But Chris Sale, what stands out to me so far this year, Stephen, he entering tonight was at nearly an 11 K per nine rate, but a 1.69 walk rate. I think that's what's outstanding to me when it comes to Chris Sale. He looks as sharp as he ever has. I don't think that anyone, you mentioned it, I don't think anyone really could have, confidently expected for Chris Sale to show anywhere close to what he was during his peak. But he's showing that right now. An over 11 K per nine rate, while also having, which now is probably a walk rate of under 1.5.9 innings. He's been absolutely accurate, just excellent. And you may worry a bit about the innings that he's pitching, but with that walk rate being so low, he's been so efficient that you don't really worry about the workload. It could not have worked out better when it comes to Chris Sale. And if the Braves can continue to get a Chris Sale who's near the level that he was as potentially being the best pitcher in the American League 5, 6, 7 years ago, they've really got something moving forward to put with Max Fried at the top of this rotation.
Yeah, I mean that slider is kind of back to being vintage Sale. Left-handers are just kind of hopeless against them right now. I think lefties are hitting like 150 against him on the year, something like that, something crazy. I mean, he's dominating left-handers. The fastball is still plenty good enough, 94, 95, pretty consistently. Like you said, his command has been fantastic. He's pitching deep into games, which is another thing. It's not five and dive every time tonight he was just, I mean, I don't know if the Cubs ever got close to scoring against. It was never even. Tonight was like as stress-free a 7 innings pitched as you could possibly have in a major league game. I mean, he quite literally cruised through 7 innings, and he's pitching deep into games. His stuff looks good. He looks good. He looks healthy. He looks like he's kind of rejuvenated his career. And if he does, this is an all-time move by Alex Anthopoulos. If we get kind of the second half of Chris Sale's career where he kind of picks up where he left off when he was one of the best pitchers in baseball, I mean, the Braves just got to steal. And remember, I don't know if people remember this, but Boston sent over like $17 million in that trade. And Chris Sale only makes $16 million this year. Boston is paying for all of his salary in 2024. The Braves aren't paying a dime to Chris Sale this year. So all of this is, I mean, that kind of value. Now, yes, they did have to give up Vaughn Grissom, and that's not nothing. But especially with the injury to Spencer Strider, everything Sale's doing is just magnified that much more. It's just been unbelievable. Knock on wood, of course. Injury stuff is always the concern with him, but he's been amazing. And if this continues, this will be an all-time move from Alex Anthopoulos.
I think another thing that stands out about Alex Anthopoulos' offseason that may not be talked about that much, but it was from a depth perspective. We talk about Reynaldo Lopez, and Chris Sale looking like absolute home runs as far as the starting pitching rotation goes. But Alex Anthopoulos also made it a point to really deepen the depth that was there for the Braves in terms of their rotation as well as their bullpen when it came to left-handers, and also when it came to the quality of that depth. Adding Aaron Bummer, adding Chris Sale, adding Ray Kerr. You had Tyler Matzik coming back. Obviously, Matzik has not been able to really contribute anything so far. You had Dylan Lee coming back from injury, and you also had AJ Minter. But I think that it's notable that the Braves had 4 innings from last night, including Minter's bounce back performance, but also 7 innings from Sale tonight. That was 11 innings from Kerr, or excuse me, actually 12 innings between Kerr, Dylan Lee, and Minter last night, and then Chris Sale and Aaron Bummer tonight. That is 12 innings of the Braves left-handers, 12 straight innings going against the offense that was second in baseball coming into this series against left-handed pitching. I think that is a notable stretch of success that really shows that the Braves were spot on when it came to not only identifying getting some southpaw depth in their, ready to go at the major league level system, but also they got quality. That's a really good stretch for the Braves, lefty depth in their bullpen and their starting rotation, and that really is encouraging as we go throughout the season and especially lining up for the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, the more you look at Alex's offseason, people were upset when the Aaron Bummer trade initially happened, just because it sent away Soroka and Nicky Lopez and shoemake guys who fans liked. But you go look at what those four guys the Braves traded away have done for the White Sox. It's been a disaster for all four of them essentially. And I've written about it. I've talked about it. I think Aaron Bummer's been fantastically. He's been really, really good. He's had some bad luck, but he's been very good. But yeah, Aaron Bummer, Chris Sale, Ray Kerr looks incredible. I mean, he's throwing 97 from the left side with a really good slider. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with him when Pierce Johnson comes back. I don't know if you can send him back down as good as he's looked. Obviously, Anthopoulos added Kelnick, he added Duvall. We can't forget Pierce Johnson and Joe Jimenez were free agents too. That those signings happened before free agency started, but technically those were additions in the offseason because both those guys were free agents, and Alex added those guys too. So yeah, we probably need to talk more about how good of an offseason Alex had and how many of those guys are contributing at the moment. We'll do that a little bit more as it gets further in the year, of course. But yeah, he had a really good offseason, and he's the amount of depth on this team, especially when you factor in the injuries they've already encountered and the severity of the injuries they've encountered, to still have one of the best records of baseball. All credit in the world goes to Anthopoulos.
And I think another interesting thing that stands out to me from the offseason is we could talk about all the moves that Alex Anthopoulos made, but I think sometimes the biggest moves that you make are the ones that you don't. And Alex Anthopoulos all off season long, even after the second straight time where the Braves struggled in the playoffs, he talked about the fact that, listen, we got a lot of confidence in our offense, and the Braves offense so far this year, outside of Marcell Ozuna, who I clearly think it should be in the MVP conversation in the National League so far, his Braves offense hasn't lived up to their reputation so far this year. But tonight it was nice to see the second straight night of 9+ hits. I believe 7 runs for the first time, maybe since April. But the thing that stood out to me tonight, Stephen, was Matt Olson and Michael Harris II. They both went deep. They both hit home runs. And I think that outside of Acuna and Austin Riley, who we'll talk about in a minute, those two are really your highest upside offensive players. I'll even say that Michael Harris II at the same level, maybe a bit higher actually than Ozzie Albies when it comes to offensive upside. But the point that I'm getting at is that balance wise, getting those two going from the left side would be a really encouraging thing to see. You've seen them make good solid contact in recent days and weeks, but it was nice to see them both be able to homer on the same night, a night where you're hoping it could be a reference point to really get them going here in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, with Matt, this has been coming. I mean, Matt's really been crushing the ball lately, and it was just a matter of time. Riley went through a similar thing. He's been crushing the ball. Even Acuna. I mean, I know Acuna was over 5 tonight, but Acuna hit some absolute rockets. The one he hit in the 8th inning, I thought was gone for sure. It just died on the track. But yeah, there's been some really hard hit balls. Like I said, Matt's been kind of on it for a while. The breakout was coming with Mike. I'm anytime he swings at strikes and takes balls, I'm excited. I mean, the 4 pitch walk he took the at bat after the home run was almost as exciting to me as the home run. Just because he laid off 4 pitches out of the zone in a row, and that's the second time he's done that. I think in this series, and so he had a 3-hit game against the Mets. Same thing. He was taking a lot of pitches out of the zone and only swinging at pitches in the zone. And, we've talked about it a lot with him, but that's kind of the key for him. If he swings at strikes, he's got all the talent in the world. That dude can hit 30 home runs, no problem. He's got light tower power. But when he starts swinging at junk is when he goes through these kind of miserable stretches for him. So, yeah, it was good to see the offense just in general. Like you said, they had 10 hits last night for the first time in like 3 weeks. They had, that was the first time in 3 weeks they'd hit double-digit hits in a game. Tonight they had 7 runs for the first time and probably about the same amount of time. So it's been a long time coming. It's been a pretty unusual dry spell for what should be one of the most talented offenses in baseball. Obviously, they're dealing with injuries. They don't have Murphy, they don't have Riley right now, but um, it's good to see. It was a welcome sight. 7 runs. That big 6-run inning. We're kind of used to seeing that. They scored in the first inning, which is something we haven't seen a lot. So yeah, good to see. Hopefully, it's sign of things to come. This Cubs staff is one of the best staffs in baseball. So they're not doing it against just anybody. And the two guys they faced in these first 2 games both had ERAs in the ones when the game started. So it's still pretty tough pitching they're facing, and to see the offense break out like that was tremendous, and hopefully a sign of things to come.
Absolutely. And we talk about, the Olson, Ozuna, Riley, Ronald Acuna Jr., Michael Harris, each of those guys coming into tonight, a hard hit percentage of 48% or better. Each and every one of them, their expected batting average, their expecting slugging, their expected WOBA, all those numbers, their expected numbers were, at different levels of significance. All of them, their expected numbers were better than their actual numbers. So, in other words, better days are to come for this Braves offense. But speaking of better days to come for this Braves offense, the one thing that I will say is that the Braves continue to get a bit of positive news when it came to Austin Riley. For those who remember, I believe it was Sunday. Was it Sunday? Yeah, it was Sunday when Austin Riley exited the lineup against the Mets with what was called tightness in his side. Of course, us seeing what happened with Sean Murphy in the starting game of the first game of the season. Fearing the oblique, is he going to be out for a long stretch? Something we definitely don't need. But thankfully, it seems as if Austin Riley continued to get better. On Tuesday, reported feeling much better when it came to his side. It looks like that he may actually avoid an IL stint. Probably will, return at earliest on Friday. But definitely with the team that has suffered their, fair share of injuries so far to significant players, Stephen, good to see that Austin Riley, it seems he's avoided major injury. He should be back sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and he was kind of rounding into form. It was really bad timing. I thought he was really starting to break out a little bit, and the Braves don't have a ton of depth in terms of infield. Zach Short has come in and done unbelievable in Austin's absence. He's made a difference in every game he's played in so far. So good for him. But obviously, you don't want to depend on that for too long. And like you said, it looks like we're going to avoid anything serious with Austin. I think if it was the playoffs, he would probably be playing right now. I do think because it's May, I think you're right. I think the earliest we'll see him is Friday. I think he'll get tomorrow off. And then obviously Thursday's an off day. So, that's by giving him tomorrow off, you essentially give him 2 extra days rest. So I'm guessing that's what Snit's going to do. It obviously helps when you've won the first 2 games of the series. There's less pressure to play him. So I'm guessing that's what it is. But yeah, it looks like we avoided serious injury. You never know when a guy pulls a muscle in his side like that. Like obviously we're still waiting on Sean Murphy to come back. He's not gone out on a rehab assignment yet. Snit talked about it the other day. It wasn't the most, it wasn't the most glowing update you've ever heard. Snit was kind of in a bad mood when he was talking about it, so it's tough to tell exactly what he meant, but it didn't sound like it was particularly close, but you never know. I mean, he could go out on a rehab assignment tomorrow for all we know, so we'll see. But yeah, the fact that Riley avoided a big injury, huge. We need to get him back out there, see if that bat can come alive again with Acuna and Olsen and get this offense rolling again.
Absolutely. And speaking of the offense rolling, again, I know that they're nowhere near where you would expect them to be. A couple of home runs tonight, but the home runs haven't been coming in bunches as you would expect. But Steven, something that stands out to me is ever since that West Coast road trip, you haven't seen us in a game have the most strikeouts we've had is 10 in a game since that West Coast road trip over this 6-1 stretch. Since that West Coast road trip out to Seattle and LA, regularly having about 4 or more walks per game as well. So the Braves, I think, approach at the plate, even without the home runs not yet being there where you expect for them to be, they're still doing a good job kind of creating the opportunities. It's just them converting the opportunities. And one other good thing that was great to see tonight compared to the past few nights, there were no pickoffs. I really can't comment to the point of what exactly was cluing teams off as to why they were able to pick Acuna off 3 times and Albie's off, once between Sunday and Monday. But one thing I'm more than sure about is the fact this Braves offense isn't to the level that it needs to be for them to just be giving outs when it comes to pickoffs at that rate. So it was nice to see the Braves avoid those pickoffs. Seems like they definitely had to talk about it. But expanding on that, it seems like the approach for the Braves is definitely in place. It's just now really starting to see those hard hit balls either fall in or go over the fence more often.
Yeah, the pickoffs were weird. You know, everybody has a different opinion on getting thrown out on the bases. Some people believe that it doesn't matter when or how you get thrown out on the bases. If you ever get thrown out on the bases, it's a mistake. It's a boneheaded play. I don't necessarily agree with that. I do think there are times where the other team just makes a play. If you try to steal and the pitcher, slide steps and the catcher's got a good pop time and they throw you out, was that a mistake or did you just get thrown out? Now there are times when you get thrown out on the bases because you did something stupid. If you're standing on second and a ball gets hit to the shortstop and you try to break for third and he throws you out, obviously you made a mistake there. When you're talking about pickoffs kind of live somewhere in between those two, right? And so people get very upset about them. I understand they're not a good look. If Acuna had been thrown out at second those 3 times instead of picked off at first, I'm guessing the fever pitch would have been much less. It's something about getting picked off first that just it seems like it's a way worse than getting thrown out at second, even though effectively it's the same thing. So yeah, it was a very unusual, and obviously Ozzy got picked off right after that. So it was a rough stretch, and like you said, and Brian Snitker said it after the game. Uh, at least before tonight, this offense has not scored nearly enough runs where the Braves can just be giving outs away on the bases. And I'm hoping that was just a one time kind of flukish thing where they just all kind of happened at once. But yeah, that was weird. That was wild, and hopefully it's behind us now. But yeah, it's good to see the offense. It's good to see the home runs. It's good to see barreled balls. The Braves are still kind of unlucky in that regard. We've talked about it a lot. I'm not going to go through it all again, but the Braves still are dealing with some barreled out issues that are much more significant than most teams. But the ball's leaving the yard. The weather is getting warmer. This team usually warms up with the weather, so hopefully those balls start flying out a little bit higher rate. Um, and this is just kind of the start of it. It's been about 3 weeks, about a month for this offense in terms of really being dynamic. And obviously they've faced some incredibly tough pitching. They've had an unbelievable stretch of like 5 or 6 straight series against top 10 pitching teams in baseball. So that doesn't help, of course, but hopefully the offense is coming because the pitching is not going to pitch to this level all year long. The offense is going to have to pull some more weight at some point.
And Stephen, I think that that's an important takeaway for where we are. We're in mid-May. The Braves are at 26-13. I think that's not going to surprise many, but I do think that it's noteworthy of just how quality of competition the Braves have faced. As you mentioned, we're going through like the past 5 or 6, series that we've seen against, top 10 pitching staffs, especially some of the stronger bullpens in baseball. But before that, within the first 3 weeks of the season, we faced all 4 of the teams that were either in the AL or NLCS last year: the Diamondbacks, the Rangers, the Astros, as well as the Phillies, and we went 10-2 against them. The fact that the Braves are 26-13, they've lost Spencer Strider, they've been without Sean Murphy. The main 3 guys offensively have not really been going on. They were without Ozzie Albies for an extended stretch. But the fact that they face one of the toughest schedules in baseball and they're still 26-13, to me, that tells me there's a lot of room for improvement in this team. And yet, as you mentioned yesterday, they're still on pace to win 106, 107 games.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see for the third straight year, I think we're going to kind of see that, you know, we get to June 1st, and this team just explodes, just takes off like a rocket, because my guess is by that point, the offensive guys are going to be hot. The schedule is going to lighten up a little bit. The bullpen pieces should be back. Sean Murphy should be back. My guess is we get to June and we're going to see another, we've seen it the last 2 years where this team gets to June 1st and they just hit another gear and they leave everybody behind them. And, you know, it's not like the Rays are playing bad baseball, right? They've got almost a 700 winning percentage at this point in the year. They're on pace for like 105 wins. So, let's not get too crazy about it. They're still winning at a pretty incredible clip considering everything that's happened so far. But yeah, my guess is once these offensive guys start really going, the schedule lightens up a little bit, the bullpen gets healthy again. I think you're going to see another year, at least offensively. Now, we do need to expect at some point the starting pitching is going to take a step back. They're not going to. I don't think these guys are going to pitch. Right now these guys are averaging like 7 innings a start and like 1 earned run for like the last 3 weeks. I mean, that's crazy. Like the starting pitching has been absurd, and thank God it has, because the offense has been pretty bad in that stretch. But we should expect a little bit of regression from the starters. They're not going to pitch like this all year long. But even with that said, the rest of the team should be ready to carry more of the load. And I think once we get to June 1st, like the last couple of years, you're going to see a whole different gear, especially offensively.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast, yes, we expect the offense to get going, but again, I just think it's awesome to see. Yeah, I agree with you. The pitching overall for the starting rotation, especially without Spencer Strider, we're seeing them probably pitch a bit over their heads. But again, the underlying metrics don't necessarily suggest that they're just completely, outperforming their metrics. You're seeing Max Fried start to round in performance. His excellent performance last, I believe, Saturday against the Mets. We talked about Chris Sale as well as Reynaldo Lopez. But Steven, what about Charlie Morton? 3-0, 3.14 ERA, 43 innings so far at 40 years old, continuing to miss bats at a pretty good rate. He'll be on the mound against Javier Assad of the Cubs. The Braves are going to be facing a third straight Cubs starter with an ERA under 2. So the Braves are facing their own, quality, they're facing quality opponents. But Charlie Morton, I don't think that he's being talked about enough, just how consistent he's been. He puts together another performance. Then the Braves sit here and find themselves sweeping, one of the top 5, 6 teams in the National League. It just keeps getting more and more positive. But your thoughts so far on Charlie Morton, who seems to be going through one of his better stretches as a Braves starter?
Yeah, I'm gonna start calling him, Charlie Brad Roland Morton, just because Brad's been kind of his main cheerleader for the last few years now, and Brad's been right. I mean, there's been times where Charlie's looked like he's 40 years old, and some of the fans have gotten pretty loud about the fact that maybe it's time to hang him up for Charlie, or time for the Braves to move on. And every time you get to the end of the year, you look up and Charlie's got an ERA in the threes and a FIP in the threes, and he's still, holding his velocity and still looks good and looks healthy. And, same thing this year, and maybe even as a touch better this year, quite honestly. So, I if I'm honest, I'm always a little skeptical. Father Time is undefeated. I am kind of always waiting for that other shoe to drop with Charlie and for him to start pitching more like his age. But, you know, all you can do is be impressed. And, I do think at some point, Charlie's going to start to show a little bit of his age, but it might not be this year. It might not. He might. I mean, he's done it the last couple of years where he gets to the end of the year and he's still had a really, really good season. So, credit to him. He's obviously in unbelievable shape. He obviously does a lot of hard work in the offseason to take care of himself, get his body ready to pitch a major league season at his age. So credit to him for the amount of work he must do, away from the field to do this kind of stuff. But yeah, it's been an unbelievable start for him. Hopefully it can continue. Obviously it'd be lovely if he could do it, for tomorrow and the Braves get a sweep going into the off day. But yeah, he's been amazing. And, I told Brad on Friday night, every time he does, it makes Brad look smarter and smarter because Brad's been his biggest fan for, 2 or 3 years now.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to tell you another thing. I'm a fan of. It sweeps, and the Braves could get that on Wednesday night. It'll be a great development. But again, we've worked our way through a couple of weeks where, again, we had that West Coast road trip 10 days ago. Very frustrating. Seeing the offense was no fun at all. Getting swept like we did in LA. Of course, we had the loss against the Mets on Sunday. But this Braves team it seems to be finally getting a bit of a stretch. Charlie Morton gets the job done tomorrow. We've swept the Cubs 7-1 in our last 8 games. Going into our next off day, which will be our only one for quite a while, but then potentially getting Pierce Johnson, Austin Riley back for a 4-game series against the Padres. Good things are coming for the Braves. Hopefully results will start to match efforts, and I think that you're going to start to see the best days for the Braves certainly ahead of them. So, Stephen, anything else that you've got for us when it comes to this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast?
Nope. Yeah. Just a, big game tomorrow, obviously. Scott and Brad will podcast after that game, talk about, whatever happens in game 3 of this series. One thing I do want to kind of put on people's radar, we do have some interesting guests coming up, some special guests coming up later in the week. So be on the lookout for that. And as always, we are incredibly appreciative of the support. You guys have been incredible since we moved over from battery power. Kind of the number of downloads and stuff we're getting on a show, every week in terms of, every show we do has been phenomenal. All we would ask is just continue, help us grow it. Tell a friend about it, keep downloading those episodes. We're going to keep bringing them to you. And we are very, very much appreciative of the support we've been given.
100% echo what Steven says. It's just fun to talk Braves baseball with great minds like Steven, but just in general, also just providing, our thoughts and, what, our analysis, what have you, that, it's good to see so many people enjoy it. Kate, thank you enough, for that support. But for Stephen Tolbert, you can find him at _outliers. Myself, Shawn Coleman, you can find me at Stats SEC. Find the podcast available wherever podcasts are at Hammer Territory. Just hit that subscribe button and you'll get the latest content whenever it's available for free. And also make sure to follow all of the Hammer Territory representations across all forms of social media, Twitter/X, Instagram, Facebook, constantly uploading content nearly on an everyday basis at those locations. Until next time, for Stephen Tolbert, my name's Shawn Coleman. We will be back with you Friday. As Stephen mentioned, we're going to be having some special guests, maybe even this week. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory podcast.